Thanks everybody for coming. Excited for the session. And so is my dog. So we are really fortunate to have some collaborators and partners from Michigan today who are also connected to the REAMP network, which focuses on equitable decarbonization of the Upper Midwest. And they're going to be talking about, and we've also partners with them on an opportunity for supporting food policy councils who are also working on climate change work and looking at the overlaps between food system issues, food security, local food development, food rescue, composting, how all these different food, and with a strong focus on equity and how these all fit together. But wanted to go ahead and hand it off to Daniel and have him start the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Really excited to be here today. My name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Central Business Forum. I'm going to have some slides to run through in a minute, but first off, we wanted to briefly introduce our collaborators today. And again, thank you to Roger and the Chicago Food Policy Action Council for hosting us today. With me today With me today are my colleagues Danielle Todd, the Executive Director and founder of Make Food Not Waste, and Khara DeWit, the co-founder and principal of Southeast Markets. And we're going to give each of them a quick opportunity to introduce their work, and they'll have a presentation to share after I run through some of my presentation as well. Danielle?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Todd. I'm the Executive Director of Make Food Not Waste in Detroit, and excited to talk with you today about urban food waste and maximizing food streams in the urban setting.
And Khara.
Hi, I'm Khara DeWit with Southeast Market. I'm co-founder. We are 2 years into business, so just new at this, but really passionate about food justice, particularly bringing and building a more resilient food system within our zip code of 49507. Today I'm going to be talking a lot about the equitable and sustainable intersection of our work and how it relates to climate action as well. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Danielle and Khara, and I am also looking forward to seeing your seeing your presentation in a few minutes here. Now I'm going to share my screen, and just as an FYI to our organizers, as I do this, it's going to be difficult for me to see the chat. So if you need to get my attention on something, please just holler or shut me down or something. So my organization is called the West Michigan Business Forum. We do business as the Michigan State Business Forum. I'm going to kick off our presentation today with a talk about why food systems are necessary for equitable climate action and why it's important for businesses and institutions.
Daniel, I'll just one quick reminder, just to keep it a little bit slower for the interpretation. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'll keep it slow. So Michigan State Business Forum, our organization promotes business practices and policies that advance climate leadership, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. We've been active either regionally or statewide for 30 years later this year, and doing it in many different ways. Our organization is amongst the leaders in our region, the states, on circularity issues, the intersection of sustainability and equity, and looking for opportunities for the public and private sectors to work together on climate solutions. Some of the things that we are really excited about right now, public investment in climate solutions. And I want to talk about some of these things really briefly to set the stage for the intersection of food systems and talk about some of the things that we're excited about in the climate space. And what we're most excited about at this moment is the intersection of private and public investment, especially the public investment that we're seeing in the past year. including the bipartisan infrastructure law from the federal government, the Inflation Reduction Act, also from the Biden administration, and in Michigan, our Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. And when you share out the slides, you can go through these at length, but I'm not going to bore you with all the bullets. But the bipartisan infrastructure law, this was passed 2 years ago now, and it's currently making significant investments throughout the Midwest in infrastructure and climate solutions. A large investment in public transit in history, a large investment in clean drinking water and wastewater. And if you're in the Chicago region, only just right outside of the region is the city of Benton Harbor on the other side, on the other side of the border of Michigan. And that's community organizations from heavily working with, and they've had a drinking water crisis for the better part of 2 years. And this law has allowed that community to almost fully replace its drinking water infrastructure in less than a year's time. Also looking at significant investments in our safety nets, and electric school and transit bus fleets, and creating a more climate resilient and efficient electric grid. Then the following year, they followed up with this past August, the Inflation Reduction Act, which when implemented, will cut climate pollution by 40% by 2030. Substantial opportunities to invest in electric vehicles and rooftop solar, in electric appliances, $27 billion of clean energy technology, and $9 billion of federal procurement of American-made clean technologies, as well as smaller but meaningful investments in circular economy, food waste, and other ways to advance climate solutions to the food system. And then, of course, locally, we have the Michigan Climate Healthy Plan, which was concurrent to these efforts, and the Whitmer administration, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, worked with a large stakeholder process to develop these recommendations over a 2-year period, announcing them late last year, seeking to make our state carbon neutral by 2050. Now working to invest $110 million in EV charging infrastructure, $15 million dollars from recycled materials management, including substantial investments in food waste and composting and other end of life strategies for food products. The goal is to reduce food loss and food waste by 15% over the next 10 years. Other things briefly, really excited about. Within all three of those programs is a commitment to the Justice 40 philosophy, which is a commitment to invest 40% of the money that's spent in climate solutions in or on communities that are most impacted by climate change, generally understood as BIPOC majority communities and under-resourced rural communities. Now, I'm going to share a few slides here, which are not my slides. They're from a group called the REAMP Network. So you're going to see a graphic shift here. And the REAMP Network is a group that introduced my organization to Roger's organization. It has a mission. The mission is to set collective strategy, enable collaboration and climate solutions in the Midwest, with a North Star goal to equitably greenhouse gas emissions in our region by 2050. And this is something that we've been actively collaborating with Roger on for a few years now. The network is 130 organizations strong, with a commitment to connect people to each other, co-create a strategy, and build capacity to implement that strategy. It has 5 strategic priorities: transportation, energy democracy, agriculture, which is where we come in today, buildings, and integrated voter engagement. And the REAMP network, and Roger was one of the leaders. It was one of the leaders of this effort. Did a study the year before last on how to begin addressing emissions from the food systems in agriculture. And from this, it created a report, Transforming Agriculture in the Midwest. And its findings from that was that the 9 REAMP states, so Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. I'm sorry I started talking fast again. I'm gonna measuring myself here. Make up for 42% of the agricultural emissions in the U.S. Agriculture is an enormous contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and our region is responsible for approximately half of those. This is through three main sources: crop cultivation, livestock, and fuel combustions. Since 2005, these emissions have increased by 9%, and we believe there's an opportunity for massive transformation. We believe there's also an intersectional opportunity to promote equity. The same root causes of greenhouse gas emissions are creating social inequities in our communities and on our farms. 95% of farmers are white, 67% are male. And in 1920, 14% of U.S. farmers were Black. In 2017, only 1.3%. And some of my colleagues will talk a little bit more about that shortly. We see social inequities of the workforce. 50% are undocumented, and labor and safety laws do not protect them from hazardous conditions. And that's a priority of my organization this year, to work alongside grassroots activists in the private sector to reduce exploitation of farm workers. From this REAM's agriculture hug, it set 5 guiding principles: address systemic inequities in food and agriculture systems, benefit communities and farmers, hold a vision that is expansive and multifaceted, not myopic and limiting, disrupt the status quo while recognizing existing value, and cultivate relationship with producers and farmers. If successful, this will create a systems approach, acknowledging that the relationship between mindsets, patterns, values, and events and issues is important, acknowledging and highlighting the interconnections of the many moving parts of agriculture and food systems beyond, and understanding who is benefiting and actively involved in these systems. Some examples, some example of this system, some of the systems approach, and you'll see the iceberg diagram here, highlighting all of the unseen parts of the system. So not only what we are seeing and what is happening via events, but the patterns of behavior, the trends over the time, the system structure that enables that. How are these parts related? What influences patterns? And finally, the mental models that make those structures possible and encourage those patterns of behavior. The values and assumptions and belief systems that are shaping the system. Some examples of this: inequitable food access and health and economic inequities, discriminating predatory practices, property laws and land access, the monopolization of big agriculture, and of course connections to other strategic priorities I mentioned from earlier, such as transportation and clean energy. So some solutions that REAMP and our organization are proposing: regenerative farming, farmers as champions, with 5 key practices. No-till farming, don't disturb the soil. Cover the surface with cover crops. Sustain living roofs, perennial crops, and agroforestry. Grow a diversity of crops and add animals to the land. Now, these practices not only reduce emissions and sequester carbon, but they also lessen the loss of valuable topsoil, enhance water quality, restore biodiversity, increase wildlife, produce higher quality nutrient-dense food, and increase farmer profit. And of course, now, what is stopping this transportation? Who has the power in the system? So just 4 corporations are providing seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, etc. Farm subsidy and crop insurance do encourage this consolidation. And speaking of intersectional equity, this creates barriers for young and BIPOC farmers, while making legacy and institutional farmers relying on government payouts to make ends meet. So where we're headed as a REF network, looking at ways to engage in the Farm Bill, water and agriculture issues, elevating positive models of work, eliminating CAFOs, combined agricultural feeding operations, and promoting access to local foods. Things my colleagues will talk about in more detail shortly. And where Roger and I have come into this is neither of our organizations work really closely with farmers, but we work very closely with grassroots and grass top stakeholders operating within the regions we serve. And many of those come together through food policy councils like Chicago, like Roger's group. And if you're not aware of the standard definition, food policy councils brings together stakeholders from diverse food-related sectors to examine how the food system is operating and develop recommendations. And currently there's 97 of those in the Midwest. So we created a project to engage these groups and bring them in our network and find opportunities to collaborate. Our objective is to select collective strategy and label collaborations on climate solutions in the food system, understand what action can be taken to reduce emissions from food systems, and to facilitate engagement and action between food policy councils and climate policymakers. We created a toolkit to enable this process and to serve the councils we're working with, educating, inspiring, providing them resource in an easily digestible way, and with the hope that we can move things forward. And with Roger's partnership and leadership, we're now actually through Rampant offering mini grants to other food policy councils through the Midwest to learn from the activity that's happening in Chicago and the activity that's happening in Michigan and other places. And this could include, of course, discussions around regenerative farming and consolidating power, addressing discrimination against BIPOC farmers, the upcoming farm bill, again, those water and agriculture issues and those positive models, CAFOs and access to food, as well as these more specific examples of leadership that I'm not going to go through here, but when you see the slides, you have an opportunity to click on the links. And I think through this, we're demonstrating that throughout the country and throughout the Midwest, established food policy councils, including Chicago, are taking a leadership role in this activities. So before I turn it over to my colleagues to talk a little more about the intersection between equity and climate action, I want to talk about one organization like mine that's involved in this. You know, why the private sector cares about leadership from the public sector, and why they care about grassroots and institutional leadership within the food system. And I think we're finding that sustainable business programs, so organizations that are actively investing in things that you might refer to as ESG, but we think of it as sustainability programs. They're adopting many of these same tactics. So they're talking about regenerative farming. They're talking about local food systems, and they're talking about how they can deploy their community investments to address basic needs. And this leadership, in our mind, is coming from the private sector. So we believe food systems are a unique opportunity for business institutions, that organization I work with, to find common grounds with grassroots action. And here's an example of it. We're heavily involved in creating a circular economy, and this is some work that we did a few years ago. We'll be repeating this year through a new study. And if you look, if we're trying to find value, within the food system and the life, 35% of that is coming from organics. The vast majority of that food loss and food waste going to a landfill, and value that's lost that could be sent back to the private sector and businesses, and to better improve their bottom line, to create jobs and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And on that note, I'm going to turn over to Danielle, who's going to talk about the opportunities to promote climate action and equity within the food systems at length.
Great, thanks, Dan, and good segues for me to talk about food waste. So let me pull this up here. And all right. So it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and names in the group. And If we've met before, you of course know that this is my absolute favorite thing to talk about in the world. And so I'm happy to have a chance to talk about it here with you. And if this is the first time that we've met, you'll probably leave here thinking, oh my gosh, this woman loves talking about wasted food so much. So thanks for the opportunity. First, just a little bit about the issue of food waste and why we get so excited to work on this issue. Some of you may be familiar with Project Drawdown, which did a review years ago, and then they updated it again a couple years ago to really identify the best solutions to climate change. And we were thrilled that reducing food waste is #1. So that's a great site if you want to go play around with it. And they have different ways that they decide different rankings, but in one of them, reducing food waste is #1. So very important issue. And the reason why is because of its relationship between food and all of these items listed here. So from a global warming perspective, and Dan touched on this, is that when food is in landfills, it decomposes and it releases methane into the atmosphere. Methane, of course, is one of the most harmful greenhouse gases, and a pound of landfill food is almost a pound of methane that is released. Fun fact, Illinois, according to ReFed, landfilled 2.5 billion pounds of food in 2019. So lots of opportunity here to redirect that food into feeding people, feeding animals, composting, digestion, anything you can do, but just keep it out of the landfill, please, everyone, no landfill. It's also a really big use of our resources. So our fresh water, our land, our fertilizer, and as Dan had in his slide, it is the largest component of the material that's in landfills. So again, huge waste of resources that are not renewable, and it just takes up a lot of space in our landfills. And then, of course, its relationship to transportation. So we're driving food around all over the place, using energy to do that, only to then throw away about 40% of everything that we grow. So it's unnecessarily putting extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Why does it matter? It matters to just about everybody for all sorts of reasons. A lot of it comes down to money. So if you are a business that is in the food sector or in the food system, you are throwing away perfectly good food, you're throwing away money. And we see that that's for farmers, for processors, manufacturers, grocers, food service operators, and also households. So the statistics are that an average family of 4 throws about $2,000 worth of edible food away every year, which is a lot of money for just about everyone. And something that if people could learn to do differently, they would have more money in their pockets. Of course, in Chicago, we see a food insecurity rate of 1 in 5. And as more food is disposed of, instead of getting to people, it becomes an additional access issue. So certainly the food rescue is not a solution to food insecurity, but it is one component of when we think about the fact that we have so many people facing food insecurity and we do have surplus food, there's a great opportunity to connect those two. And then, of course, with the cost to the environment, not to harp on the 2.5 billion pounds, Illinois, but Michigan is not far behind you. But that is definitely something to remember, that there's much opportunity here. Okay, so when we think about the future of food waste, or future of food, we can appreciate that waste is no longer possible, not only because of its climate impact, but also because of the conditions we find ourselves in. So certainly hot, dry weather is contributing to disruption of growing crops all over the country and all over the world. We saw during the pandemic that there were supply chain disruptions. Those supply chains are coming back, but they're still not like they were completely. And it really showed that having a local food system and keeping food local and keeping our resources local can make a really big difference. There are other reasons too that we want to make sure that we're eliminating food waste from every part of the food system. The costs that I already mentioned, but as we are still in a period of inflation, we have higher costs for food. Anything that we can do to make sure we're maximizing our food streams is going to help save us money. We see worker shortages across the whole food sector and biodiversity loss. We have our pollinators affected, our aquatic foods affected, just about everything is affected. And so we are approaching a time where we're going to be really forced to make sure that we're not wasting food and that we're maximizing our food. We're getting there pretty soon. Okay, so now here's the super fun part. So you leave here thinking, oh, I cannot wait to go home and process everything I can get my hands on. So what we advocate for is really a maximization of our urban food streams. We all have a lot of food coming into our cities, and by not using all of that food to its fullest extent, we are really missing out on a lot of opportunity to feed people, to really keep our resources local, to improve the local food system. And we need to value that food. We need to understand that there's a lot of life left in food that we just decide that we're not going to use. So we really advocate an investment in processing. We see that as a major gap in urban settings where there aren't a lot of places that can take in the kind of surplus that might be inconsistent, or surplus that might be foods that might be toward the end of their life, but they're still usable. We use the term rescuing the rescue. We find that here in Detroit, and I'm sure it goes on in Chicago as well, is that a lot of times food pantries find themselves with a lot of food left over that they can't distribute to the community for different reasons. If you get a pallet of cucumbers, there are only so many cucumbers the community can take. And so the food pantry then is left with a fair amount of food. So that's one thing that processors can do, is come in and pick up that rescue and use it turn it into something valuable. And then the last area is taking a look at byproducts. So these are whatever's left over from a food manufacturing process. It might be your beer making, or it might be your cheese making, or if you have a tofu process in the city, whatever is happening within the city, it's likely that there is a byproduct that is occurring after that first food process is happening. Again, all great benefits for processing. We're super big fans. It helps keep your resources local. You're not sending food out of the city. You're not even sending as many food scraps out of the city. You're keeping it within the local area. You're potentially increasing food access for people. You're making sure that there is less dependency on outside food. And then it saves money, just about hands down. Anyway you look at it, it's going to save you money. I'd like to share some fun examples of what's happening around the world, and so that maybe you'll be inspired to go start some business in Chicago. This is one out of Montreal called Loop Mission. They have a number of different product lines.
I think he's upstairs.
These are 3 of them here.
Nope, not yet.
Oh. And
nope, they're on a walk.
I just muted everyone, so Danielle, you can
Okay.
unmute yourself.
Gotcha. All right. So as you can see here, these are some of the items that people are using, that this company is using to make these upcycled products. Potato peels, leftover bread, spent grain, juice pulp. So lots of good opportunities here. Oh, let me go here. Another one that has a national footprint is Renewal Mill. They make a lot of flours out of things that you may not expect. They mill soybean pulp, they mill oat pulp, they even mill unripened green banana skins. So really innovative there. And then there's us. We're Make Food Not Waste in Detroit, and we have 2 program areas. We work on a number of things related to prevention, but of course we also do processing, and share some examples of our processing work with you. One of them is we operate 2 kitchens in Detroit, and we have a team of chefs, 5 chefs that you can see on the bottom right corner. These are they're paid chefs. I get that question a lot. Everyone's paid. And they are making right now 4,000 community meals every week, all from surplus food. So they're using food from some of that Rescuing the Rescue that I mentioned. We do get a lot of overripe bananas, which become delicious banana bread. They use, we get food from restaurants, grocery stores, farmers markets, food distributors, you name it. It comes from all over, and it's quite frankly so much. We'll probably end up starting to do more than 4,000 at some point, because there's just so much food. Some of the other things that we do is you see the overripe bananas over here, the spent grain that we're considering getting into and being able to dry and mill that to have that be a flour. Excuse me. The one in the middle is kind of fun. These are actually leftover pierogi dough from a pierogi maker in Eastern Market. And our chefs are able to turn that dough into dumplings. So this is another example of a food manufacturer in the city that's making a product and just has scraps that they don't have a use for. And yet we're able to turn it into something that's nutritious and delicious for our neighbors. And we're really excited about kind of trying to find these unusual little things that we can capture and turn into something that's wonderful for people to eat. Some of the gaps that we've seen and some of the opportunities that we're looking into and others in Detroit are looking into, and we encourage you all to look into in Chicago, are listed here. Certainly, how can you create value from the whole life of food? So really looking at not stopping short once, especially in manufacturing. If you're making a sauce and you have peels or you have seeds or you have different skins, leaves of things, there are lots of opportunities to upcycle the byproducts and just different parts of the vegetable, different parts of the fruit. I remember one time, only once have I seen at a farmer's market sweet potato leaves that were delicious, and I've never seen them again. Well, those sweet potato leaves are going somewhere, and I'm guessing they're not going in bellies. So some of it too is our food items that people don't necessarily think of as food or aren't used to eating, but they're wholesome and nutritious, and someone just has to do something to them. From a business development standpoint, lots of opportunity for worker ownership, for job training. We're seeing a lot more young people really interested in climate jobs. And this is a great one because it's, I mean, what's better than food, right? So involving people in job opportunities and really having businesses, getting businesses started in the area of upcycling or food processing. And then lastly, really leaning into technology, helping connect the people who might have that surplus, people who might have byproducts, and creating markets for them so that they're also realizing revenue, as much revenue as possible from those products. Real opportunity there. Here's my contact information. I know we're going to have question time at the end, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions about processing or anything that I talked about. Like I said in the beginning, this is my favorite thing to talk about. So I would welcome anyone who wants to either call or email me and have some more conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Khara, who will talk to you about the great work she's doing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get this up and we'll start. All right. So yeah, I'm Khara DeWit. I'm co-founder of and owner of Southeast Market here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm also a director of finance at Foresight Management here in Grand Rapids, which is an energy and sustainability consultant. Definitely look them up. I'm going to be introducing Southeast Market and a bit of what C4 Leadership Council does here in Grand Rapids as well. I'm also sitting on that. I've been a social entrepreneur here for 15 years. I'm aligning myself with businesses, nonprofits, and working toward social change. So kind of my background is in accounting and financial systems, but connecting it to more of a systems approach in general. So our mission here at Southeast Market is to increase access to healthy, culturally appropriate and affordable food through a sustainable and equitable lens. Now, when you think about grocery in general, you might really rack your brain like we are about how to make this work. So we're leaning heavily on some other models locally in Ann Arbor. Some other folks are trying to work and connect local food sources. But for us, we want to really prioritize sourcing first from Black, Brown, Indigenous, local, and female-led businesses and farms. And hopefully, as I'm talking, you'll kind of understand why. So we do a little bit of both, not just like make the food accessible through our market, but we do a lot of advocacy work within the community around food justice, climate justice, and telling the story really of why that's necessary. C4 is a newly formed organization whose vision is that Black, Indigenous, and people of color and historically white environmental organizations will dismantle extractive systems and build new systems to address climate change. It's centered in human well-being and the interconnectedness of all things and access to shared leadership. So climate justice is a concept that addresses the just division, fair sharing, and equitable distribution of the benefits and burdens of climate change and responsibilities to deal with climate change. We're really working to highlight that frontline communities are usually left out of leadership in this conversation, and we want to create pathways for them to get connected to resources and be involved, because really everybody deserves a seat when it comes to the climate change conversation and creating equitable solutions for us to survive. So a really key piece of our work when we talk about this is the intersection of justice within environmentalism. So you'll see a definition here. Fighting for climate justice doesn't really mean protecting nature and the environment. We believe it also means fighting for racial justice and social justice. So the well-being of the planet and the people in it, like I was saying, we're all interconnected. We can't really strive to repair climate damage without addressing some racial injustices and actively working to deconstruct the current way we're doing things and the systems that are at work in our world and in the cities that are running as they are built. This is Leah Thomas. She's a climate optimist and justice advocate, and her definition is of intersectional environmentalism is it's an inclusive version of environmentalism that advocates for both the protection of people and the planet. It identifies the ways in which injustices happen to marginalized communities and the earth. It's all interconnected. So it brings injustices down to the most vulnerable communities and the earth to the forefront and does not minimize or silence social inequality. We believe the intersection of people, planet, and social justice is really important in this conversation. So when we talk about kind of the nexus of climate action and equitable food systems, we really want to and believe we have to address racism within our food system. So this kind of is a little bit of a visual of there's over 50 million people experiencing food apartheid. I'll kind of go over a little bit of the definition of why we like to use that terminology in a little bit. Other people will kind of refer to it as food insecurity. So of the 50 million people in the US experiencing food apartheid, 10.6% are white, 26.1% are Black, 23.7% are Latino, and 23% are Native or Indigenous. So you'll also probably hear that like restaurant workers, an occupation really dominated by people of color, should have the most access to all the food they need, but they're actually twice as food insecure on a national average. So really kind of going down to the why of us being sourcing first from BIPOC farms and businesses, we really like to talk about the hard history of America and food systems. So there's been decades of intentional policies that have perpetuated inequity in our food system. The inequity created systemically by people in power, but it's experienced most by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. It's exacerbated by climate change and capitalism. So we see systemic discrimination evident in social determinants of health. We began during COVID, and COVID really did highlight some of these disparities. So we take it a step further. We talk about how Black farmers have and still are the subject of state-sponsored discrimination and illegal land theft. America and food as we know it wouldn't have been possible without the 157 years of free labor leading up to the independence. So I think Danielle kind of went through some similar statistics, but in 1920, there were about 925,000 Black farmers, about 17% of the total US farmers. And now in 2017, we're down to about 35,000, which is only 1.7%. So quite a bit of a disparity, you know, and the racism that kind of exists within the food system really has to also address land loss. And we talk about, it's recognizing it's foundational in today's food system. It helps explain why people of color suffer disproportionately from environmental externalities and labor abuses and diet-related diseases. So for hundreds of years, through the legalization of slavery and non-existent enforcement of Black citizenship laws and the delay and denial of USDA loans through the government, we saw like systemic, directly, intentionally, and purposely condoned racial discrimination against Blacks, enslaved and free. So African Americans once owned 16 million acres of farmland, but by 1997, after many decades of Jim Crow, several national farm busts, and the generally inattentive USDA Department of Ag, less than 20,000 Black farmers own just 2 million acres of land. So the rate of Black land loss has been twice that of white land loss, and today less than 1 million acres are farmed. According to the USDA in 2012 census of agriculture, the country's 2.1 million farmers, of the 2.1 million farmers, only 8% are farmers of color, and only half of those are owners of that land. So their farm shares are growing, particularly among Latinos, who now kind of equate to about 67,000 farmers across the US. People of color tend to earn less than $10,000 in annual sales and produce only 3% of the agriculture value and farm just 2.8% of farm acreage. So when we really are kind of taking into the consideration of the history of farmers being disproportionately given access to growing within America, and we kind of equate it to why we source first from, not equate it, but like why we actually advocate for sourcing first from these farmers. Here in West Michigan, we only have identified 3. We're actually onboarding 2 more new Black farmers, but the east side of the state for sure has a little higher, but there's, in the relationships that we formed with some of these farmers, they've been able to share that they really have not been able to, even though the USDA has started to be able to roll out some funding for them, haven't actually had access to that funding. It's been a very frustrating process and hard for us to kind of watch some of that up front and up close. So I'm going to transition a little bit to talk about some of the terminology that we use in our advocacy. You probably have heard a lot of historically folks are talking about food deserts and identifying communities that are suffering from food insecurity, but we like to use the term food apartheid. To us, language really matters. When you're talking about a desert, you know, in food insecurity, it really takes away the impetus of like why it is what it is. So a desert to us is a thriving ecosystem, and apartheid really like holds and recognizes the power and the life and richness that lie in communities of color. Similarly to a desert, desert's a thriving ecosystem, and it acknowledges intentional creation and sustained inequalities of food access, and it places the value on the language used to describe food justice, and it sheds light on the systemic discrimination and its impact on these communities. So we also talk a lot about food sovereignty as being our end goal. Food sovereignty to us is not emergency food systems that address root causes of hunger. In Grand Rapids specifically, there's quite a bit of charitable food organizations that have done relief work within our communities, but we really believe that actually perpetuates the root causes of hunger. It's also, food sovereignty is not food for our community that's culturally appropriate. Usually it is more secondhand food and doesn't really hold the high value of like farm source food as well. And usually there's little to no choice for those most impacted by food insecurity. It's kind of whatever's available. And it also is not agriculture practices that deplete our soil. There's a little bit of a graph there that talks about what happened to the soil depletion within 70 years of time. We're seeing the soil hold a lot less nutrient content. So when you think about the food that we're currently buying in our supermarkets that are, you know, reliant on the industrial food system, that is really lacking some of the key nutrients we need specifically to be able to be like given to communities that really have suffered disproportionately from health disparities as well. So yeah, we kind of equate it to modern day slavery and the lack of dignity for people, planet, animals, and our earth. So what is food sovereignty? Food sovereignty is, to us, is the end goal. It's shifting away from corporate agriculture systems to a more people-governed system. It's giving people back the right to healthy food produced in an ecologically sound and sustainable way. It's our right to define and ultimately control our own food and agriculture systems. Again, like within COVID and even currently now, our food supply chain is fractured and costs are rising, and that really does end up putting and really shifting out like the access and affordability piece to a lot. I mean, it's really not great, but for us, even as a small grocer, being able to source some more of this food conventionally, prices are rising, and we are working so hard to get it to a place that's affordable for our neighborhood for sure. And it also, food sovereignty puts people who work and consume at all the points of the food chain at the center instead of the profits of corporations and markets. So when you think about where your food comes from and who grows it, all the way to like who it touches along the way until you get to purchase it from the store, there's many players and many people that profit. And so I think Danielle highlighted this as well. A lot of farm workers are underpaid. So when you think about like the initial cost of labor, usually it equates to exploitation and tells a really sad story of a lot of the immigrants and people of color who are held down even below poverty line for the sake of corporations and markets to be able to profit. So the vision we've set out for our market is to really create more and connect with our local food system in a just and equitable way. So we met with a lot of these players at the beginning of our work to create what we thought would be a just local food system. So as you can see, like having access at a market is just one small tiny way of the way we're supporting our local food system, and it really involves so many different players along the way to be able to make sure that we're honoring the people that need to, have access, but also advocating, taking care of our farmers, and creating opportunities for growing and education within city parks, and working with connecting a healthy food in our local schools, also like advocating for urban ag policies. Grand Rapids has a newer urban ag department, and it's about to get really exciting, but we're really glad that like some of the seeds have been planted there. We work with a local vermicomposter called Wormies, and 100% of our food waste does go toward yeah, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we compost all of our food waste. But that, and again, takes care of our soil, puts that nutrients back into the soil to be able to allow farmers to grow. So we really try to see ourselves in more of that closed loop food chain. Another thing that is really important that we're starting to talk about more of is a shift to agri-food, which is connecting agriculture and food. For us, like agriculture isn't just a reliance on those growing, like it's also such a piece of culture. So we're trying to bring culture back to agriculture. That was penned, I believe, through Karen Washington, another food justice hero. But it takes cooperation, like again, throughout a more circular food system and chain. So this is just kind of a graphic that I found online that I thought was really neat. But really the goal of a more sustainable food system is to prevent food vulnerability and ensure access and choice is available for healthy, sustainable, and culturally appropriate food. And in the end, like we should be able to see a reduction of 15% of the global GHG, global gas house emissions of cities. So we really believe that local food systems are worth investing in and advocating for as well. So a little brief intro to our work at Southeast Market. We are a place-based retail. The store is about 67% of our sales. We have produce subscriptions and more food boxes, which actually are the more sustainable piece of our work that allows us to reach and deliver and increase access out into our community. We work with local farms, again, sourcing first from them to see what they have available. Generally, the farms that we work with are farmers that don't have the ability to set up market at farmers markets or the resources to be able to transport their goods to storefronts or package their own food that they're growing. So it's a real pleasure. Last year, we worked with over 16 small local farms, and each week a food box kind of will contain 3 or 4 different local farms, and we usually try to round it out. It's our take on a CSA. We usually try to round it out with produce that will be used. So there is some conventional produce in there, and we find that this allows it to be more accessible to our community. We also have a program we created called Pay It Forward, which allows participants within our community to, oh, sorry, one second. Yeah, we created a couple different programs, Pay It Forward and Soul to Soul, that empowers a more generous economy and allows our community to participate in mutual aid, which really is allowing our community to come together and provide access to fresh food, farm source food through a dignified way, and honors their choice as well. So our soul to soul subscriptions work as like you buy a food box for yourself and you give one away, or you can like give money to sponsor a soul to soul subscription for someone else. So free groceries are delivered each week to underserved communities and at their residence in Grand Rapids. We also have about 12 different individuals and households that we sponsor through just the generous donations where they get to come in the store and spend some money on and choose their own groceries as well. We also have this Pay It Forward program, which reduces the cost of produce, eggs, and milk. And it creates that community-powered subsidy, which allows folks to have better access and affordability to farm-sourced food. It also allows our farmers to control and set the prices necessary for their own household and sustainability, and we want to support their flourishing as well too. And also it covers free delivery within 49507. And why we have focused and honed in on 49507. It's one of the most diverse spaces in Grand Rapids. We have different wards, ours is the 3rd ward, but there's such rich culture, history, and future, and we believe that diversity is our strength and will carry us forward. Our community also, 49507 also suffers disproportionately from dietary related illness. So you'll see some statistics there about what we are currently seeing and has been exacerbated by COVID again. Our food, whatever is not sold or distributed, is given to Wormies. It's a vermicompost company that we partner with, takes our scraps, feeds it to worms, and turns it into high quality, like viable soil. And so currently about 98% of our food waste is captured through this method. Additionally, like new soil is sold within the store to customers. We also are doing a lot with, we have a free shelf. I don't have a picture of it, but we have a free shelf where we put out like close to expiring produce that can still be used, and allow people from our community to come and shop it at their leisure and take bananas and turn it into banana bread. So we actually have some neighbors that faithfully come take us banana bread with expired bananas. And we also encourage our customers to use reusable bags. And we also are trying to make it easier for them to participate in our collective footprint and ownership of our,
Khara,
yes.
We're getting very close to time, and there were a few questions.
Okay.
If you could take another minute or two and wrap it up, and then we can get to those.
For sure.
It'd be great. Thank you.
All right. So you can find out more about us through southeastmarketgr.com. And here's a few different ways we're continuing our work, and we'd love for you to join us. So thank you so much.
The last slide, Roger, last slide.
There's always one more.
So we have a couple questions in the queue. I think the first one is specific to Khara. How are the free groceries funded for the Soul to Soul subscriptions? Eleanor is curious about that.
Yeah, so it's really neat. The folks from our community, we have a running list, so folks can kind of elect and come in and share a name with their friend of their someone they know or an acquaintance that is in need. And so that's really generally how we just choose and distribute where it goes. We also sponsor a couple of fridges within some housing commission sites as well. That they're usually there's a residential area that's like 0.4 miles away from our store that gets their fridge filled weekly with fresh food. So.
And and I think this is specific to the delivery to that as well. How does the infrastructure organization look like for the deliveries?
How does the infrastructure look like for deliveries?
Or what does it look like? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I think the question was around the funding and where it comes from. It is like donations that are given that we deploy. So we work directly with these communities or these individuals, and we have like a text system that we contact them. Some of them are walk-ins that come to the store, again, like they want to choose their own groceries. But as far as delivery, we have a whole sophisticated system that allows us to plug in their data and create a route. So every day there's about a bunch of food boxes that get deployed alongside some of these gifted subscriptions.
Danielle, there were a couple questions you answered in the chat on your, and sorry, thank you, Khara. I didn't mean to jump over so quick. Danielle, there were a couple questions you answered in the chat earlier about what does your space look like and the nutritional value. Do you feel like you've answered it in the chat, or anything you'd like to add there, especially maybe on your space and how that works and how you found it?
I would add that much like we really try to make the most use of food that's available, we also try to make the most of space that's available. And so what we find is that there are a lot of spaces in the city that do have capacity for someone to come in and use it. Either some spaces just aren't used at all. Sometimes it's just using at different hours. And we were really fortunate to partner with both with those two sites that we bring in the chef power and the talent, and they have the space, and we all get the food, and we just work together. So it's been really cool to see how that can work, and it's truly the community coming together and bringing the resources that everyone has and putting it together to make something.
Thank you for elaborating, Danielle. Danielle, Khara, any kind of final thoughts on how your work is informing climate action in the Midwest, and what are some things that you think that Chicago might be able to take away from the work that we're doing here?
Yeah, I'll begin. I really do believe that to secure a climate, like a future for generations to come, we really have to start asking and acting on the critical issues surrounding our, how we view food and how food is grown and who grows our food. Food waste in itself is a huge problem, like Danielle covered that, and the emissions that come just from processing food waste alone has a detrimental effect to our planet. So I love that there's creative ways, where we're mobilizing some of that waste out into the community. But I do think and hope that the work that we're doing as a small market in a food redline neighborhood, will kind of challenge medium to larger size grocers to also consider how they're sourcing and who they're sourcing from.
I was going to say something similar. I think what we're all here saying is that our food matters, and everyone that is part of the food system matters, whether you're an eater or you're a grower or you're working in a food service setting. And we need to value our food more and value our people more. And we're all kind of coming at it from a different way, but in the end, it's an environmental benefit, but we are our environment, so it's benefiting all of us. And there are so many things that we can all do individually, like don't ever landfill your food, but also from a city perspective, you can incorporate some of the things that you heard today, some of the things the three of us are doing. We would all love to come and help get that started, because we're all so passionate about this work. And Yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to talk with you all today, and hopefully if someone's inspired to start something in Chicago that's not there currently, that that we're doing here in Michigan.
And Danielle, I think we're all going to share our slides via Roger, but maybe you want to drop your email into the
Sure.
chat if you don't mind, in case somebody has an interest in jumping on that presently. And as a parting thought here before I turn over to Roger, I think one of the things that we found kind of through our work is that we often engage with people that are working on climate, then we engage with people that are working on food systems, and there's often a self-imposed separation between people who don't necessarily understand that we're all working on the same things. And that's one of the reasons we've been so excited to work with Roger. Is the Chicago Food Policy Action Council is an organization that really understands that the things that food systems advocates and grassroots are working on are the same thing that same thing that we're working to address our climate are working on. And again, thank you, Roger, for having us today.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to come out and share the amazing work that you all are doing. And really excited for the opportunities for collaboration down the road as neighbors, being part of the same food shed in many ways in the upper Midwest, and a lot of the same issues and opportunities. So we'll have ongoing collaborations there as well. I am going to add a quick poll. If people could go ahead and fill this out as you're coming out the door. And also in the WebEx Socio platform, there's another opportunity to connect and ask more questions and connections with the speakers as well. So folks could do that quickly, and then we'll log off and move on to the next session. But again, thank you all so much, and especially the all of you guys from Michigan taking the extra hour on East Coast time in our central time zone focused. So really appreciate you guys sticking around and getting this through. Also wanted to say appreciations for our interpreters and their work on making this available for Spanish speakers, ESL provider as well. So thanks everyone.